Lenois back with you on the Green Mountain Mornings program at 15 minutes past the 8 o'clock hour. Commonsnews.org is the web address for the Commons newspaper, your weekly reader-supported independent news and views source for Windham County. And every Friday morning during the 8 o'clock hour, we get together with the deputy editor of the Commons, Randy Holhut. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Hi, Joyce.
Hi, Joyce. Thanks so much for tuning in on this first Friday in fall, right? We're in the fall season, Randy. You see the trees turning colors out there at your compound in Dummerston?
Not yet. Not yet up here, but they will. And but of course, we're just thinking about playoff tickets that go on sale today. And
yes, all those good sports things. It's a good time to be a fan of Boston sports right now, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
And we know we're spoiled as hell.
Yes. Yeah, we are. We are indeed. And we'll get to a little local sports talk a little bit later on. Wanted to start this morning talking about Mike Fair's coverage of the Dairy Summit last week here in Brattleboro. I think it was just a week ago, right? Wasn't that last Friday?
It was last Friday.
Yeah. And Congressman Peter Welch in town for it, and as well as, he's from here, Roger Albee from the Townsend area, a former agricultural secretary, and a number of other people involved in dairy in the state, and some people here with Holstein, as well as the Commonwealth Dairy. Still, though, as Mike points out in his article, the dairy industry itself, not a huge presence here in the Brattleboro area or the Windham County area, certainly in comparison to other parts of the state. I didn't get a sense that this was one in a series of summits. So why do you think it was held down here in our neck of the woods?
Well, because of the Holstein Association and its 100 years of here in Brattleboro, the multi-million-dollar entity that kind of goes under the radar in Brattleboro, and also Commonwealth Dairy, which has been the big success story with dairy processing in Vermont. You know, they've gone from 0 to 150 jobs out there in Guilford.
So I mean, I know that they're a big success story for Windham County. That's a story that's getting out beyond our borders and to other parts of the state?
Yes, because there's huge demand for high-quality milk for making Greek yogurt. Everybody wants Greek yogurt now. And they're churning out that stuff as quickly as they can out of that plant, and they're having a hard time keeping up with demand. They're having a hard time getting employees. It's an example of value-added agriculture too. That the fluid milk prices, as was explained at the summit, are all over the place and mostly down, and the price of production is very much outstripping the price of. I mean, what they're getting for their milk is much lower than the price of production, and they're back to where they were just a few years ago, which was in deep financial trouble. Dairy farmers are.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, that's part of the complexity of this, and I really appreciated Mike's writing about it, some of the comments, because there are two things going on here, right? There's agriculture. There are the actual farmers with the cows in the field producing the milk, and then there's this value-added dairy aspect of it, the manufacturing aspect of it, if you will, with Commonwealth. And it sounds to me like most of the emphasis of this summit was on the value-added portion of it. That's really where there's growth. If we have too much milk as it is, these dairy farmers seem to be too good at their job in a way, unfortunately, because there's more milk than being produced than can be processed into yogurt or into milk or to any of these things to meet the demand.
Well, there's the problems, of course, with the international markets are, filtering down into Vermont. There's a cheese glut out there. There's a milk glut out there. And I don't know if there's a yogurt glut yet because of the ever-growing demand for Greek yogurt, but turning the milk into products you can get money for is the key to success in dairying right now. The people who've signed on with Organic Valley, the organic dairy cooperative, are getting more money for their milk than people that are selling their milk to Agrimark, the main conventional dairy cooperative that's also where Cabot gets their milk from.
Now, I have to say that reading some of the remarks there, if you're somebody who's part of the dairy industry or have been following some of the stories around milk prices, and especially in the last, I think, 18 months with the insurance program that they've tried to implement, Congressman Peter Welch mentioning needing to strengthen that on the federal level, I didn't really hear a whole lot of fresh ideas. Roger Alby's plan aside to turn Vermont into an all-organic dairy state, which is not realistic in my estimation. I don't really hear anything there that was information that people who were present at a summit like that didn't already know.
Well, the big problem with trying to talk about dairy is the federal price support program.
Right.
And the joke being, there's only 3 people that know how the federal dairy price support program works. 2 of them are dead, and the other has Alzheimer's. That it's impossible to explain. It's worse than trying to explain Act 60.
Right.
and because of this, the farmers just simply are not getting their share of the dollar for that jug of milk that you buy at the store. And that's why it's become so important for people to try things like doing farmstead cheeses, or selling raw milk, or going organic, or coming up with different ways to use the milk, and trying to break out of being trapped into a losing proposition where you're getting $18 a hundredweight for your milk, say, and it's costing you $20 to produce it.
Now, why is this something that seems to be a bigger problem for the dairy industry than other types of agriculture, would you say? I mean, you would think that this overproduction thing is something that would happen in other food sectors.
Well, because of the federal involvement in the market. And also because Vermont is still, the quality of Vermont dairy products is undisputed. Our cheese is the best, period.
Period. No argument here.
But our farms are tiny. They're itty bitty compared to what's out there in California, which kind of boggles the mind. A place deep in drought being a dairy state.
Yeah.
Or in Wisconsin.
Well, and
they have the best cheese.
Right. And so that begs the question, and I think it was Rob Wheeler from Wheeler Farm who brought up the idea of coming up with solutions on state levels, regional levels versus federal levels. This doesn't seem to me that something that can be addressed in a small sector. It is something, because let's face it, we're competing against some of those bigger states here. It needs to be something that's addressed by the U.S. Congress.
Well, then it comes down to another thing, which is trying to focus not so much to try and make Vermont fit into a template that's designed to work for mega farms out in the Midwest and the West Coast, but for small farms, because the biggest value that Vermont's dairy industry provides to Vermont is keeping a lot of the landscape in farm production and open and looking beautiful, so the tourists can come and say, "Ooh, how pretty."
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole agritourism aspect of things. These farmers all have to be very, very creative in how they continue to be value added, and not only in their products, but also in what they're offering as far as the Vermont brand. Very interesting conversation. It's on the front page. It's the blue inset box in this week's edition of The Commons, and online at commonsnews.org. Plenty of other great stories in this week's edition of The Commons as well. We'll get to those with Randy Holhut, Deputy Editor, after the bottom of the hour news break. 61 degrees outside at 20 minutes before the 9 o'clock hour. Happy birthday to Bruce Springsteen, playing a little boss here as we join. Well, you're not the boss of the Commons, right? Jeff Potter might be listening, so I can't say that. Yeah, indeed. But always good to talk to you, Randy Holhut, on these Fridays, and certainly lots to talk about in the news, and you can find it free on stands every Wednesday in the Commons in their pages, as well as online at commonsnews.org. Another front page story by Mike Fair in this week's edition, going out to Vernon for the continuing conversations. Now, they've kind of transitioned from the conversations about how to revitalize the community to how to revitalize the economy, still working with the folks from the Vermont Council on Rural Development, as well as state officials on this issue. I found the conversation that Mike covered, especially with members of Green Mountain Power in Vernon, Brian Otley, one of the people quoted in there, very interesting in that there's this company town mentality in Vernon about a nuclear power plant and being a generator of electricity in some way, shape, or form, that it really almost feels like maybe in some ways the residents of the town are their own worst enemies as far as seeing the possibilities for their future.
they're still locked into the, we're a power town. We make electricity.
Right.
And no, not anymore.
And Brian Otley saying, imagine a different future on how power is distributed with these small distribution points, and it doesn't seem to be computing there.
Well, because it's a big leap of logic, because this is the idea of microgrids of kind of devolving the power distribution from big plant, big grid, sending down to houses toward little power plants producing power for smaller areas and an interconnected grid.
And all that said, the switchyard that is in place there, owned by Vermont Electric, is really a great asset for the town. And I can't remember if it was Otley or somebody else who used that analogy of think of it as a socket waiting for a plug. But what you've got to think about there is not somebody that's creating energy, but somebody who can draw some of that energy to it. It seems to me, and it was kind of a footnote in Mike's article, some of these other ideas that are in play, like the Energy Research Center. I think those are the ideas that are really innovative possibilities for a town like Vernon.
The power production just really isn't in the cards. I mean, you're not going to get, no matter how much they hope, you're not going to get the natural gas plant there. I think that's pretty much dead. And with all the talk this week that I guess another Bill McKibben piece saying that we got 17 years to figure out a way to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels, or that's it.
Yeah, that's pretty much a ticking clock right there. Did they elaborate? It wasn't really mentioned as much in the article, but this Energy Research Center, it seemed almost like the town officials would like to talk more about it, but they feel a little bit under wraps at this point.
Yeah, I think that's still an idea waiting for a little bit more meat to be thrown on the bones. Yeah,
and maybe a little bit more of a learning curve for the residents in the town to get behind something like that versus a gas plant or whatever else wants to be done. But certainly a conversation that's taking them in the right direction. It seems like people understand in Vermont the asset with that switchyard and the possibilities in Vernon, and that's good news.
Yeah, that could happen. That could happen. Just figuring out the image of the socket looking for a plug,
right,
is a good one. But I think the right plug is going to be what's going to be hard to determine.
Yeah, we mentioned Vermont Council on Rural Development being a partner in that, and Paul Costello was there. His cousin, I believe, Admiral Barry Costello. I think
I'm not sure.
They are related.
Well, I'm not sure.
But I don't know how.
I've got a scorecard for all my Costellos.
I know all the Costellos. No, I know.
They all have law degrees.
Right.
And Barry is the baby of the bunch.
Right. And well, here, sorry to all the listeners out there for the genealogical conversation, but Admiral Barry Costello is brother to Tom Costello.
Correct.
Who's with and I know, and Tom has told me that Paul is his cousin. So there we go. So I was right in terms of that connection there as far as things go. But you covered Admiral Costello's presentation at the American Legion. I actually saw Lieutenant Colonel John Hagan last week at the Hog Jog for the Bacon Fest, and he was very pleased with the turnout, very pleased with the presentation. Seemed to be pretty thorough, exactly what you'd expect from an admiral who's been in this war on terror.
Yeah, well, it's not often you get flag officers coming through town. I mean, he's a 3-star admiral, and commanding a fleet. Driving an aircraft carrier. So his group was providing the air support for the initial invasion of Iraq back in 2003. And he had, before he got that assignment, he was stationed at the Pentagon and he was there the day of the attacks, and the plane crashed not far from where his office was.
Yeah, that was an incredible little bit of recounting in your story. I should mention this is your byline. You were there covering that. I'm sure that really kind of hit home for people there. Just how, and he seemed detached. He seemed very much a professional soldier, and something that really, when you talk about an attack on his place of work and on his coworkers, to extend that analogy, could be very personal.
It was, and that's what the most inspiring thing to him was the next day when everyone came back, and even though there was smoke coming from the wreckage from where the plane hit. People were determined to pick up and carry on and start planning for how to avenge this unthinkable attack on the Pentagon. And the real takeaway from Admiral Costello's talk, besides how many different places the U.S. is involved in actively, I mean that he opened with the fact that we just another weekend we draw on 6 different countries,
right,
and
right.
That doesn't get a ripple in the press. That he really believes that there's never been a finer military force than we have right now in terms of they're all volunteers, they're young, they're educated, they're hardworking, they're innovative, and he feels very secure with them on the case. He saw them in action during the first stages of the Gulf War, and they just, as he put it, ordinary people doing extraordinary things every day.
Yeah, well, and he described himself as a glass half full kind of guy when talking about the military. So that comment had to do with the capabilities. I mean, you'll hear some military leaders gripe about lack of resources or too much oversight or not enough support. He doesn't seem to be worried about any of those things.
Well, I think this is kind of a slight, maybe just response to all the nonsense that Donald Trump has been talking about how dangerously weak and undermanned and under-resourced the U.S. military is.
Yeah.
No.
No.
No, we still spend more than our potential adversaries combined. We still have capabilities that countries can only dream of, and we have a high-quality and motivated force.
Yeah, and the mindset has completely changed in terms of how you approach conflict in this war on terror era. You're not doing bombing and then dropping paratroops and sending in the tanks. It's not these massive land operations with a whole lot of resources and ordnance and things like that. You've got to be more nimble. Nimble is the word I've always heard in the war on terror that people need to be more aware of, and it sounds like Admiral Costello gets that at least. Yes,
because he's not so much the academic like Colonel Hagen was, that he spent so much time, especially on the diplomacy end. He's a classic sailor that started, from being an ensign fresh out of Holy Cross to being a fleet commander.
Yeah. When he said at one point that civilian leadership fumbled the ball with regards to the Iraq War, I was curious what he was specifically referring to.
Well, without having to write another long story about that, remember how we were supposed to be greeted as liberators and sweets and flowers being bestowed upon us. That after Iraq was invaded, and after what was left of the Iraq's military was defeated, there was no plan for what happened after that. And the Bush administration tried to impose this free market paradise on Iraq, that on a country that was heavily socialized, that was used to the government providing for all its people, and then, of course, firing all the people who had even the slightest association with Saddam Hussein, and disbanding the army, and then creating the new force that would be fighting you for the next 7 years.
Right. Okay. So it was the exit strategy. I was wondering. I mean, you could make an argument that civilians fumbled the ball too in terms of being duped into going into war in the first place. So I was wondering.
That's a whole other thing. I mean, that war. I kind of deliberately left out a lot of the arguments that were against the war. Certainly, as one of the voices writing against it at the time and afterwards. But this was a war that was illegal and never should have happened, and was arguably a violation of international law, and President Bush on down are in violation of some of the Nuremberg laws. Yeah,
and certainly good recounting of all of that in your story, bottom of the fold of the front page of this week's edition of The Commons. And I believe BCTV was there filming it as well, so people can go and hear all those things that were left on out of your article firsthand by going to the BrattleboroTV.org website and watching that presentation, the first of many and relevant topics to be had here as we are in this election campaign season. Then people still talking about this war on terror, America's longest war. What a a tribute, right?
Well, the next one's going to be good because Chris Day is going to be talking in October.
Okay.
About his experience. So he was there with the Vermonters in Afghanistan, leading the Vermont Guardsmen.
Yep, and these are all at the American Legion, Post 5, right there on Linden Street in Brattleboro. Closing out our conversation with Randy Holhut, as we typically do, talking about the local sports scene. You and I last Friday had written off the Brattleboro Colonels football team before the kickoff against Middlebury, and I think a lot of other people did as well, but major upsets of all time probably in Vermont football. Well,
I don't know if you'd go that far, but certainly a team that found itself and that was led by the defense.
Well, Middlebury hadn't won a game hadn't lost a game in like 2 years. I would say that's probably, there's not a lot of precedent for that.
Yeah. And also, the Brattleboro has won a game up there in about that long.
Yeah.
But I think this is they found an identity, which is okay. You have one of the best running backs in the state in Czech Tikite. Use him.
Yeah.
Use him as your LeGarrette Blunt. Just pound. And Colton Ravenna being the change-up or the blocker, the lead blocker in front of Mr. Tikite, and you can rack up a lot of yards that way. Tony Martinez, the quarterback, doesn't have to do that much. Just hand the ball off.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what he did. I think in your story
he
you said
did not attempt a pass in the second half.
Yeah, and didn't need to. That's ball control, good defense, good running game. You can get pretty far, and hopefully they will tomorrow for homecoming. We're going to see you out there for both the soccer games as well as the football game tomorrow. We saw you at the Colonel girls soccer game versus Springfield, where they won 8-0 last week. They looked pretty good.
Well, it was a reflection of their opponent. It was the only team they've beaten this year. At Springfield, they beat them at the Lady Patriot tournament over in Bennington earlier this year, and then they clobbered them last Friday.
Yeah.
As you were saying about Burton, which clobbered them at the Bennington tournament. This could be ugly tomorrow, but hopefully the girls have gotten their defensive act together, and there'll be a closer game. It'll look more like the 1-0 game against St. Jay on earlier this week.
Yeah, hopefully, and hopefully we'll see people out there, or they'll be tuning in to us on the radio, calling those
or you can be
soccer
there and
games.
listen to it on the radio.
Or be there and listen to it.
Too.
That's always good stuff. Always good to talk with you on these Fridays, Randy. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that was Randy Holhut, Deputy Editor of the Commons, online at commonsnews.org. Back to wrap up this edition of Green Mountain Mornings after these messages.